Are you looking to buy one of the new iPhones and not sure which one has the better camera? I'm going to be running through each model and explaining why it may not actually matter which one you buy. Coming up. Yo guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marlon King and I do tech reviews, vlogging and camera gear and all sorts basically. So if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. Today I'm going to be looking at the 3 new iPhones and looking specifically at the cameras on them. Now, I already own an iPhone. I've got the iPhone 6s, and to be honest with you, most iPhones get upgraded with the new operating system, so I have most of the features. I'll be honest, I'm not really interested in the old 3D emojis. I'll leave that to someone else. But what I am interested in is the camera, because as I covered in my last episode, the most important camera is the one you've got with you, and a lot of the time that is your phone. So without further ado, let's go through the cameras on these phones. A lot of the new phones come with 2 lenses. One is a wide angle and one is a portrait lens. What does that mean? Well, the wide angle is going to capture more of the surroundings, and the portrait lens is going to have the equivalent of a slightly zoomed in look and feel. What that means in comparison to a DSLR, you're going to be getting roughly a 28mm lens equivalent on the wide angle, and give or take 50mm for the portrait. The best way to do this, rather than running through each of the specs of the phones, because you can look that up online, it's everywhere, is actually doing a quick comparison. And I'm going to start by comparing the iPhone 10 with the 8 Plus, because they are the closest spec models. Now, when you compare the wide angle lens on both these phones, they are pretty much identical. They have an f-stop of 1.8, which means it's going to work well in low light, and that's considered a fast lens. It will also have optical stabilization, which is perfect if you're doing video recording like myself, or actually if you're doing low light shooting, it will help you get more of a steady shot and reduce the chances of your images being blurred. When it comes to the portrait lens, the iPhone 10 has a slightly better f-stop rating. So on the 8 Plus it's an f2.8, and on the iPhone 10 it's an f2.4. It's such a marginal difference, you're not going to notice too much. But that said, you know, if you are doing low light shooting, that's going to help. If you're videoing on that portrait lens, that's just going to help as well, get that slightly shallower depth of field, which means you can blur out the backgrounds and things like that. And that's not using their software. With the 8 Plus, you only get optical stabilization on the wide angle lens. On the iPhone 10, you get optical stabilization on both the portrait and the wide angle lens, so definitely worth considering. It's going to help eliminate getting blurry photos in low light, and it's also going to help make your video footage look a lot better. So when we compare with the iPhone 8, now that only has 1 lens, and the lens on it is a wide angle, and that's going to be identical to the one on the iPhone 10. So you're not gaining anything from upgrading to the iPhone 10 if you're not planning to use that portrait lens. It's also worth noting that all 3 phones have the same camera on the front. Now, it does say on the specs that the iPhone 10 has the extra sensors on the front, which is used for the emojis, but all of that's just going to be behind the scenes, and the camera is essentially going to be the same. Looking at the video formats available, all of them can do 4K in 24, 30 and 60 frames per second. They also have various 1080p options. They can do slow motion at 120 frames per second and 240 frames per second. You've pretty much got everything covered. So as far as I'm concerned, that's better than most portable cameras, or even DSLRs for that matter. When we look at it like that, there isn't really much difference between all 3, and if you're looking at the wide angle lens in particular, it's the same across all of the models. Whichever one you buy, you're going to be getting good photos and video from a phone perspective rather than a camera perspective. I don't have any of the phones yet. I'm looking at this for myself to upgrade, so I thought I'd be sharing this information with you. I've seen some video footage taken on the new iPhones and they look very good. So if I do upgrade, I'm looking forward to being able to use that. So the reason I'm doing this video is I've been researching myself whether it's worth upgrading and what the benefits are of these phones and the cameras on them. Hopefully this information is helpful to you. If you have one of the older iPhone models, I'm going to quickly run through what you're expecting to gain if you did upgrade to one of those newer models. If we compare specifically the 7 Plus, you're pretty much getting the same lenses as the 8 Plus. The exceptions are it can only shoot 4K at 30 frames per second. If being able to shoot at 60 frames per second is something important to you at 4K or 24 frames, then it's worth the upgrade. The other thing to note is that the 7 Plus only has optical stabilization on the wide angle lens. If you want to be able to shoot 240 frames per second at 1080p, then again, you're going to need to upgrade to one of those newer phones. If you're looking at the iPhone 7, you're going to have the same sort of issues with regards to 4K. If you want to shoot at 60 frames, you're going to need to upgrade, and likewise with the 240 frames per second, 1080p. If you're upgrading from the 6S Plus, now the wide angle lens on that is an f-stop of 2.2, so you are going to gain slightly better performance at low light, but not by much. It does have optical stabilization on the wide angle lens, so that has followed through into the newer models. And again, if you want that on the portrait lens, you're going to have to upgrade to the iPhone 10. And if you're upgrading from the iPhone 6S, which is the bracket I fall into, then it's pretty much worth upgrading anyway, because you have the f2.2 lens, so you're going to gain extra on the wide angle down to the f1.8. There's no optical stabilization. It's worth upgrading from any of the iPhones ahead of that just to get that optical stabilization. And the video modes are a lot worse. If you are upgrading from the iPhone 6S or 6S Plus, then it's worth noting the front-facing cameras aren't quite as good as the newer models, so you will be getting a slight upgrade there. I think you could only record at 720 on that front-facing, and now you can film at 1080p, if that's of interest to you. Personally, I don't use the front-facing cameras because I don't think they are as good as the rear-facing ones. Right, that's it guys, just a very quick summary of those camera lenses on the new iPhones. I hope that helps you. Certainly I've been researching it and seeing whether it's worthwhile. For myself, as I said, I'm on quite an old phone, so it's definitely worthwhile upgrading for myself. However, I'm probably looking at the 8 Plus over the 10, at least for now. If my research changes or anything else changes, then I may reconsider. Thanks again for watching guys. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you soon.